Hey, you are listening to Abyss Gazing, a horror podcast where we celebrate all things spooky and mental health.
I'm your co-host Mark,
And I am your co-host, Josh.
and we have back again Andy, who has visited us for a couple Halloween episodes now.
Yes, hello. Thank you guys for having me. Excited to be back.
This is quite different than what we're typically used to talking about with you.
I ran through the list of every time I've been a guest on the show, and yeah, I was like, it's been Halloween and Halloween Kills, Good Burger, and
Good Burger is so underrated.
Oh, vastly underrated.
Bring It On, Cheer or Die. So,
Yeah.
it's been a very kind of like campy, popcorny type kind of area that I'm used to talking about. So this one threw me for a loop.
Yeah, this movie, we're talking about 1981's Possession, which is one of the most like crazy movies I think we've ever covered on here, but it's also this like deeply layered film that makes amplifies because of how layered it is. I feel like it amplifies the crazier elements because it starts out as a drama for like the first half of the movie, then you get into like the weird half of this movie, and it's just a wild ride.
The movie, like I've said a few times before getting on here today, it's just completely batshit. It's insane. So it's crazy. It's got some interesting backstory too. Like the fact that it was banned for a long time. They actually, so they did, it was presented to like the Canes originally,
Mhm.
and it was presented for, it was nominated for Best Film. And the actress, that was
Isabel Adjani,
yeah, she ended up winning Best Female Performance.
as she should.
Yeah. Considering she plays two different people in the movie, and one of them is completely crazy. So yeah, she had two roles in the movie. One was fairly minor, but then she had her wife mother role, which is kind of what earned her the best actress at the Canes that year. This movie, it came out and was actually put on the a watch list in the UK, which got it banned for like a decade all over the place. They re-edited it at one point from the 2 hour version we got to see on Shutter that's released now to like an 80-minute version that was released in the States temporarily.
Oh, that would have to be incomprehensible.
Yeah, I feel like this movie, like for the first like at least act of this movie, like the editing style is really unique because I feel like it jumps around to where just as soon as like you have a shot that's established, it jumps to another thing. And I think it's part of the charm of the movie, and it really makes the ending that much more effective. But like I couldn't imagine an 80-minute version of this movie.
No.
Yeah,
And to piggyback off the just talking about how bizarre this movie is, I mean, we'll get into the content and anybody could watch this and just they'll tell you it's bizarre from the things that happen on it. But it's also I love to just like kind of look into the production of these things. A lot of movies tend to be made in the country they're made by. So if an American movie tend to be made by American directors, French movies, French directors.
Sure.
This movie threw me for a loop for 30 minutes and I had to throw this out the window because I was trying to figure out where this movie came from. And as far as I've been able to look it up, it's a Polish director making a movie filmed entirely in Germany with mostly German background actors, but then Sam-Neill, who's from a New Zealand actor, and then a French actress as the two leads. So it doesn't really have like a home, and it just kind of fits for how bizarre this movie is. That it's kind of just like a transnational, just kind
it's
of like
it's
insane.
also
It's insane
it's
from head to toe. Is basically what I'm trying
Yeah.
to say.
it's also that director's only English movie.
Yeah, and exactly,
Oh.
and it's English language too, which is also
Mhm.
crazy. I
It's
was
his
trying to figure out if it was a German movie and we were just supposed to believe they're speaking German. You know, we do that sometimes, but
Sure.
I don't think that's the case because I was like, I think it might be English. I didn't know what was going on
well,
in that
she
sense.
I think in a couple scenes she actually does speak French.
Yeah, I think in the ballet like
Yeah.
Yeah,
flashback
Which,
scene, but who
yeah.
knows? That
That
could be in France. I don't. They don't tell you.
yeah.
It's a crazy movie of a descent into madness. It
I
Yeah,
really
I felt
is.
mad.
I also want to like I know this movie is like over 40 years old, but because of like its history with like being like unattainable and being banned in certain countries, like I do feel the need to throw a spoiler warning up here
Let's
because
do it.
if you
Yeah.
have not seen Possession, it is now streaming on Shudder. It is a crazy descend into madness, as Andy said. And I just feel like the less you know about this movie coming in, like I didn't know anything about this movie. Mark was like, "This is something we should do." It's he gave me like the brief spiel of like the history of the film, and I was like, okay. And I am so glad that I went into this like just completely blind because I feel like it made all the much more like impact coming in blind. So this is your official spoiler warning for Possession. And if you guys haven't seen it, we're going to be talking about spoilers because it's hard to talk about the insanity of this movie without talking
Yeah.
about spoilers. So
Yeah, I don't see how you could really get into any detail about the movie
Yeah,
without
it,
talking about the movie.
yeah.
It's that crazy.
If I could throw a quick vague kind of comparison, so I also didn't know anything about this. I've never really heard of it when you sent me what we were watching. And when I saw the title and the year, my brain went to Exorcist because I always assume when a hit movie comes out, something's going to come out similar. So in my head, I'm just like, we're going to see something akin to The Exorcist, but I think this is way more akin to like Suspiria or other European horror movies where it's not really it doesn't really follow many American tropes of horror movies by any chance. So if you
Now,
want to go in blind, just know you're getting more Suspiria and less Exorcist.
I haven't seen Suspiria yet, the
Oh,
original
okay,
or the remake,
I've never
but
seen the remake. Yeah.
I would say it makes more of a until you get into the really crazy stuff at the end, it falls more in line with a more realistic Mouth of Madness.
Yeah.
yes.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great comparison. And also it's like too like to jump off of like what you're talking about, Andy, like I remember the first time watching The Exorcist and just being kind of like it was okay. I feel like this movie is like Possession. The title Possession is like a dual meaning because not only do you have this like subplot of this woman being quite literally possessed by like a demon or like almost like a Lovecraftian monster. But on the flip end of that, you have like a possessive husband. And I think that's kind of what makes that first act so remarkable is the fact that you're kind of getting to see this woman not only torn between worlds, but also between like lovers. And I feel like probably the first like 30 minutes of this, man, like I don't know if you guys have ever like been in like toxic relationships where like infidelity has been involved, but like that like the first like 30 minutes of this movie with like Mark finding out about Heinrich uh really really like impacted me because I was like, man, I was like, this feels painfully familiar.
And Heinrich was just he was just a crazy character in himself. I don't think there was any sane character in the entire movie. I really
No,
don't.
let me ask you
Every
this, like
everybody was nuts.
when they first like reveal like that you have the face reveal of Heinrich, did anyone else like double take for a second and thought that that was like a really young Anthony Hopkins, or is that just me?
No, I did.
No,
I was like,
I
wait a minute.
yeah, he's got the look for sure.
I was like, he's too tall, but it looks like Anthony Hopkins. Maybe he's shrunk over the years. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I gotta say for myself, Josh, thankfully I haven't been in a kind of toxic relationship, but I will say the disorienting effect of how this movie was, it kind of made me feel like I experienced one by the time it was over.
It,
You know.
So the thing with the movie, if you read IMDb's description or Rotten Tomatoes description of the movie, it's a spy coming back from assignment to his family and his wife's descent into madness and his descent into madness. And that's kind of like the summarized version of this movie.
Hmm.
And I do wish they had made it clear that he was a spy. But if he was a spy, why was Heinrich so easily able to beat his ass?
Yeah. That's hilarious. I'll be honest. I didn't know he was a spy until I read the Wikipedia. I read the Wikipedia thing about like a half hour into the movie just because I was getting a little disoriented, and I was like, let me just see what the one sentence summary is. And I was like, because I saw that scene makes more sense when he's kind of quitting, and you see the four
Yeah.
spies, and the guy's got the eye patch. Once you
Yeah.
know it's a spy, that makes perfect sense. But I was like, what is this guy's job? And like I don't know. I didn't really get the spy thing, but
Yeah, because he
yeah.
walks out of that meeting too with the briefcase and like pauses and like goes to the column, like puts his like knee up, opens up the briefcase and just like pulls out this like massive wad of cash and like you're like, what does this guy do? And then like the like members of the spy committee come back in the ending, like after he's almost on his deathbed and like you're like, oh hey, remember this character? And I think it's like it's very ambiguous how like what this guy actually does for a living.
Did you catch in that opening meeting and the end sequence, there was a tie between the two?
No, I did not.
No.
Because they ask him, does he still wear pink socks? And in the ending scene, when the people show up to, when the like government people show up to Sam-Neill, one of them leans over and pulls up his pants leg for something, and he's got on pink socks.
Is he? I do remember the pink sock thing now that you mentioned it, but I missed the connection. So does that mean he was the guy who was going to be his like predecessor? Remember, because he
I
was like, "We have a new guy for you," and he's like,
I don't remember if it's the predecessor or who, which kind of threw me off because he didn't seem to recognize the guy, but they were asking him if he knew this specific trait of the guy. But
"Yeah,
yeah, I don't remember if it was who he was supposed to be following that he had developed a relationship with as a spy, or if it was his replacement. It's one or the other. But
yeah,
yeah, they make the comment in that opening meeting just before he leaves. Does he still wear pink socks?
yeah, do
And then
yeah."
and then he shows up at the end of the movie during that whole sequence.
Yeah, I gotta say, like, this is a movie that I don't think can be digested in one viewing. And the fact that the three of us have all just seen it once, I'm like, man, I need an expert over here, someone who like loves this movie to really,
I
so they can, because I have a lot of questions and a lot of the dialogue went over my head. The dead dog
the
thing, I didn't really understand that whole symbolism the entire movie. There's a whole dead dog. They talk about it. You see it. I didn't, you know what I mean? And I
yeah.
know it went over my head. I'm not saying like it was random. I just was like, so much was going on. There's sensory overload for me.
So my favorite director is David Lynch, and one of the reasons I like David Lynch is because he's a director that notoriously 7 out of 9 of his movies are just like fever dreams, and you walk away like just saying like what did I watch, and you're immediately like I gotta dive in. Like I have a book that like just dissects Blue Velvet from start to finish.
Hmm.
And I love like walking away with the book. So like this is one of those movies that like I walked away from this movie the same that I did the first time I watched something like Lost Highway or like Mulholland Drive. I was like, what did I just watch? And so I love YouTube because like I love that like you can like find videos that like they dissect it and they're like, what did this mean about this? Like what does
Yeah.
this symbolism mean? And I love like just going into these like rabbit trails. And for this movie, when I tried to find it, like literally could not find anything. Like it's literally just reviews for this
Yeah.
movie. Like I was like, I need someone to explain the ending to this movie because the way that this movie ends with like Sam Neill's Mark character at the door, and then you have Helen, and then you have like the rest of the world is like seemingly like almost like facing like apocalypse styled treatments. I'm like, what is happening? Because you have a callback to like the airplanes coming, and you have that callback to Mark and Bob playing with the airplanes, and like right before Heinrich calls and says, hey, like your wife is like killing people. Um, and like the ending of this movie like threw me for a loop because I was like, I was just enthralled by that point. I was like, what is this ending? Like, what am I supposed to do with this?
Yeah. I don't have a deep like reading of it yet, but I just think on the surface, being in Germany during that Cold War era, I think just the idea of war breaking out was on everybody's mind at all times. So I don't know it's deeper tie to the story at hand, but I kind of think that was just the idea because we'd get those weird shots over the wall with the barbed wire with the troops like looking over in binoculars every once in a while. And so I kind of just think it was a Cold War era kind of,
Sure.
World War
Yeah.
Three could break out at any moment. But I'm
Yeah.
sure there's a deeper tie that I haven't gotten because I've only seen it one time.
Well, I mean, you've got Demon Sam-Neill, Demon Mark, at the teacher's
Which
door, who the teacher is the same actress that was what's her name? Because everybody knows by now I'm horrible with names.
Anna.
Anna,
Yeah, yeah,
I can't
Anna.
remember the teacher's name, but Anna's the wife.
I don't.
the
They never.
teacher's name was Helen.
Okay, I don't think they actually said her name. She
Helen?
wrote it. She wrote it on a piece of paper and gave it to him at one point. But
They
she,
they they do end up saying it. It's
they
and
do,
it's not from him or like her character,
or
but
was
it's a
it
scene
Bob?
between like when he puts Bob to bed, he's like, "Do you like Helen now?" And
Oh,
then they
okay,
have that like awkward conversation. That's where that comes from.
Oh
okay,
yeah.
all right. I didn't remember him ever saying her name. But I don't know. I kind of got the feeling that maybe she was a female demon version,
Oh, like it had
where
already happened.
Yeah.
demon Sam-Neill is at the door now because of the way she turns and just stares and all the weird noises in the background, and Sam-Neill's like rubbing himself up against the glass door behind her and stuff. I don't know. That was the way I was kind of thinking of it. Is
Being
that
bo-
maybe she was actually like a demon clone, like the Sam-Neill was.
it's very possible. Yeah.
Yeah. And like also I think one of the things that makes this movie like just so unforgettable because like Shudder's like description of it is like this is like a one of a kind nightmare. And I came into this and I was like, you know, I've been through a lot of streaming services. I've been a horror fan long enough to know that like if someone describes something as like one of a kind or that it's like too scary, you're never gonna finish it. Like Skinnamarink, a perfect
Oh God.
example. Like both Mark and I like loathed that movie. Like
I haven't seen it yet.
and like I understand like what they were trying to do and like I understand the quote unquote appeal of it. But like I walked away from that movie and I was like, this is like from like a narrative and a story standpoint, this was terrible. Wasn't scary. It was just an hour and a half of my life I'll never get back. And with
Well,
this movie, this is the first kind of movie that I've ever seen that like actually lives up to that. It's absolutely 100% insane.
well, this is a release. The Shutter version, if you read up on it, it is the original release, but it's part of this new trend over the last couple of years of taking classic horror, taking the original film, scanning it in high definition, and then re-releasing it to new audiences. You've heard me talk about my copy of Dunwich Horror I just got from Arrow,
Yep.
and it's the same thing. They took the original 1970 film and did a high res scan of it to produce the new movie. And this was the same thing. They talk about the whole process they went through to do exactly that. And being that it's one of those banned movies like Cannibal Holocaust and God knows what else, it had some hype behind it, and it lives up to that hype. It's insanity.
Yeah. Yeah, I 100% agree with it. And I think one of the things that like is not only the fact that like this movie is so insane, but it's so multi-layered too, to where on the surface you're essentially looking at the death of a marriage and this growing infidelity and this woman's like just grossly unsatisfied marriage that she's been stuck in. And I think one of the things that works really well is like is the fact that this is like so multi-layered to where like Andy, you mentioned this earlier, but like some of the script in this like just doesn't make sense. And I think a part of the reason that like really makes this work as well as it does is the fact that you are having some of that. There's like the genius of this script because like it gets like really philosophical in like certain portions of this too, like where like you're kind of seeing like like the standpoint on like the other side of the world to where like everyone has a different definition of like what God is or like what the afterlife is gonna be. And you can tell that it's the circumstances that their characters are dealt with in the movie about how they reach that.
Yeah, and I watched it with my wife. I watch a lot of these movies with my wife. And she was like, I feel like this movie was somebody telling a story after having a really bad relationship and divorce. That's where the script came from. That was her description of the movie.
And
So, and it makes sense for this movie.
yeah, I think she's absolutely correct. Like I think that like that is 100% what you walk away with this like this is someone that is coming from a place of brokenheartedness because like I've talked about this before, but like I have faced infidelity and the mental health journey of like recovery and like the unclenching of like letting go of bitterness and like unforgiveness and just hatred that comes with that you have to put that somewhere. And for me, like a lot of it came from like poetry and like storytelling. And I think that for this, like whoever what like wrote this movie, like a lot of that came from now I gotta look it up because I gotta give credit. Um the director and Zuzeli Zelensky and Frederick Chutin, who is the adaptation. Anyways, I think that both of them you can like definitely tell like there is like heartache and they're writing from like a place of something that they know because I mean at the end when you create art, you create from what you know, whether that is film, music, art, uh, at the end of the day, like you're gonna essentially just do what you know best.
Yeah, this definitely grew out of that. I'm kind of hoping that the writer ended up in a good place because the ending of this movie isn't necessarily the cheeriest thing. So I'm hoping this did help them work through it. But yeah, I think that is what always kind of makes a movie like this interesting because if it's not tied to real world human emotions, then it can just be looked at like as like just kind of like over the top craziness for no purpose. But when you kind of look at the subtext beneath just the insanity that's going on in front of you, um, that's how you kind of find the deeper meaning. Because I will say, I would love that I saw this movie as someone who loves film. I'm so grateful of watching this, but it wasn't an easy watch, and
No,
it
by
and it
no
wasn't a
means.
fun watch by any means. So I'm going to be recommending this, but to certain people. Like I didn't watch it with Masha, and I can't imagine her liking this. I don't know if you guys are fans of The Office,
Mhm.
but there's the one character Gabe who's into really weird, obscure horror
God,
movies.
yes.
Yeah, and he's dating Erin, and like she always wants to watch like Wally or Shrek, and then he'll put on this movie basically, and it's like to someone who really loves movies, they can get so much out of this, but to like a general mainstream fan, I could just see them being turned off by. I mean, it's gross. Like half of this parts of this movie, I wanted to throw up. So it's like I could see it turning people off. So it's like it's going to be a good recommend for me, but I also want a caveat of being like you gotta love yourself some movies to love this. I think.
And uh,
It's one of those movies like we mentioned Skinamarink, and it's one of those movies that to me fell in that art house kind of style
Hmm.
where Skinamarink was so art house it was horrible. Which you see people put out these movies that are like, oh, it's a art flick, it's fantastic, and all this, and you watch it, and it's like, what kind of drugs were you on to enjoy that? That's what Skinamarink is to me. This was an art house movie that was actually had coherence, was done well, and thoroughly portrayed what they were trying to portray. Were they trying to portray somebody becoming possessed or dealing with the emotions of a horrible divorce? Now, both of y'all have talked about her being in a heartless relationship, but the whole point of him turning down going back into the field, and he said it openly quite a few times, was I want to be with my family. So we're almost ignoring his portion of essentially walking away from his career so he can be with his wife and kid, who he comes home to, basically telling him, I don't have any feelings for you anymore and I'm done with this.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text help to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below, wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Yeah, that's a really good point. For me, honestly, one of the most like heartbreaking parts was after they first break up, and then he kind of goes on that bender and then goes to the apartment, and Bob has just been alone for God knows how long, just a mess. Like no one's been taking care of him, and he realizes that like she can't be like relied on for these kind of things. I don't know, just stuff about like neglected kids really kind of gets to me in movies. So you're right.
Yeah.
We haven't really been
and
looking at it from his perspective.
I also want to say too, like that, I think none of us can really speak to the effects on a relationship of something like war or like being gone for an extended period of time, because none of us have any like physical ties to being enlisted to the army or anything like that. And you have to like take into consideration that like this is like also taking like a effect on like Bob as a child. Like the fact that like Bob is like still normal with all of this going around at such at this age, like where he's like obviously coherent, like does I think speak a lot.
Yeah, because not only do we not have ties to something like the military, we also don't have children. So it's like a double
Yeah.
where like that. I feel like that's something
mean,
you could only really feel when you understand what it's like to have it.
I do have kids, so
Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't know that.
I mean, she kind of hides out a lot, so we don't see her very much.
I'm sorry, Mark. I didn't know that.
She's 18. She just turned 18
Yeah.
a few weeks back.
Okay.
So
Well, then, yeah. I mean, you can imagine when she was younger and what Bob was like. Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
well, I had to, and maybe I got to view this with a little different aspect than y'all did, because I went through a relationship with a cheating spouse and
Same.
who actually tried to prevent me from seeing my kid for a very long time. And I used to go very long periods without being able to see my kid at all because of it.
Yeah.
So I guess I have a little bit different aspect. And for the record, I actually met the dude and kind of thanked him for taking her off my hands because she was freaking crazy. And that's
Everything happens for a reason.
Yeah.
That's also not the like cynical ex. I hate everything.
Yeah.
That's like, yeah. I'm not going to get into details for that, but there's court records on that one.
Yeah, I can't say that like I've ever like I've never been married. I've only ever been married to my current wife, and that's the only wife I plan on being married to. But like I have faced like what it's like to be cheated on, man, and like it messed me up for like quite a few years because like it had a not only like did it make me angry, but like it also like questioned like my self-worth and my own self-value.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what was happening to Mark in the first 40 minutes. Mark's his name, right, in the movie? Sam
Yes.
Neill? Yeah, to the first in like the first 40 minutes. Because he not only gets cheated on, but then he gets his ass kicked by the guy who cheated on him. Like, it's like the worst of the worst of the worst.
And it's not even like he kind of put up a fight. He got his ass handed to him
Yeah,
by
and he
Heinrich.
started the fight, which is even like more humiliating.
Well,
Like,
he's got
like
it.
Heinrich was. Yeah,
And
what you gonna say?
Heinrich was like dancing at the same time he's kicking his ass. So it's like, dude,
Heinrich's
what the
insane.
hell?
I couldn't make heads or tails of that guy. I was like, I don't know what he feels at any given moment.
But unlike also too, like I think it goes back to like it's not an old saying, but like the saying of like destruction finds destruction because like here you have a woman in Anna who had a husband, had a son, and goes off and finds another person to basically cheat on him with. And it's not like this is like a fresh thing. It started like the movie establishes that it had been going on for over a year
Yeah.
before Sam Neill's character Mark even finds out. And then in the end, you find out between a conversation between Mark and Heimlich's mother that Heimlich also has a kid and also has
A wife, yeah.
a wife,
Yeah.
and like he basically left them to be with Anna.
They went to
And
the United States.
oh, did they?
Yeah.
Fair.
They said what city she went to. I just don't remember what it is. But they're he makes the comment that he leaves them there so they can have a better life or something like that. But they went to the United States.
All right. Well, I withdraw my statement, but I also think that like to a degree because I also feel like he didn't necessarily have to find another woman to be with. Uh, but again, like he made the decision willingly to pursue another woman while still married and still a father.
This is on the sillier angle, but was anyone thrown off with a toddler named Bob?
Yes.
Like
Yes.
when they first mentioned it in that very first scene when she's like, Bob already knows you're here. In my head, I was like, oh, Bob must be like an ex-lover or like something like that. And then when it was a little boy, I was like, that's got to be Bobby. Like Bob is so funny. And they kept saying it. My brain couldn't like click that it was a boy. I was like, is that the
Yeah.
accountant? Like who's Bob? Is that like who's this old man with a bald spot that's gonna roll up in this movie at some point named Bob?
Like Bob does not
yeah.
fit this discussion.
Just yeah, I've never seen a little boy that went by Bob. It almost was like they're like, "What's an American name?" Bob. That's perfect. That'll be the boy's name.
And my issue with it is that I watch way too much that 70s show. So I kept wanting to call him Bab.
Oh, that's so funny.
Bab.
Yeah,
yeah.
it's wild because like the first time that like they say it in the movie, I was like, all right, like I had the same reaction, like this has got to be the name of the lover, and then
Yeah,
they're like,
the
this
first
is the
line is
kid.
literally Bob knows you're here. So I was like, oh, that could be anybody. Like it could be like because I thought maybe Bob was her husband and she cheats with Sam Neill. Like we didn't know anything at that point. And that a boy would never have been. I could have gave me 100 guesses. I never would have said a young boy.
Yeah. So
So Bob.
anyway, like moving away from Bob, I have like a question because like I feel like this film is so like multi-layered, but like I walked away like wanting to podcast about like all of the conspiracy theories that this film gave me. And the scene where like she's in her apartment and brings the detective in that's looking at the windows and like you see like you see the creature in the bedding and like there's just this pile of like mucus and blood and what I'm imagining is like also semen like it's just kind of like all the fluids like flowing together. That milk scene that she has in like the middle of like the
Subway or
alleyway or
whatever.
I'm gonna
something,
throw up, but yeah, go on. What I meant for this movie was gross, but yeah,
like
go on.
the very fact that like that
That's so
sequence
so that's
ends.
that sequence is actually one of the reasons it got banned for a while.
Which, all right, so like my question is though,
But yeah,
like
what were we
it
gonna say?
did, because it ends the same way. Like she mentions to the detective, like, yeah, like you'll have to forgive him. Like we spent all last night making love, and then you kind of see this like almost orgasmic like energy from her. Is that like, did we witness like another like her actually like having sex with this creature and like it just wasn't like physically manifested the way that it is in the end?
She was having a miscarriage.
Yeah, that's what I
Oh, is that what
read
it
it
is?
as. Yeah.
They show it, and then in like the immediate next scene, she mentions having a miscarriage. And the
Oh,
description, when you read the movie, they about the movie, they talk about that scene being a very graphic miscarriage, and it's one of the reasons that the movie got banned.
I um and I don't blame you, Josh, for being confused because I did read it as a miscarriage, but I didn't understand it in the context of the movie. It wasn't until after I just quickly read through the plot on Wikipedia, and that's a flashback. So I didn't. I thought it was like
Yeah.
happening concurrent in the movie. So that happened in that 1 year period when he was away, and so that might have just been the first time the demon like kind of touched her or she felt it or something. But yeah, it was
I,
something dying inside of her.
I don't know, because like the demon like also like comes into her like earlier in the movie to where like you can see that like she has quite literally like already made love to the demon. She's already sacrificed things to him. Like, so
It
that's
had
kind of
it
what
had a
took
slight
me.
it had a slight Hellraiser vibe because of that to me, where Hellraiser was the lady killing people, so what's his name could come back.
Yes.
And
Okay.
I
Yeah.
got that feeling the whole time because it seemed like they showed her off and on sacrificing people to him became he became more human like as it went on until
Yeah,
he turned into essentially demon Sam-Neill.
to give it a more family friendly relatability. It's like the Brendan Fraser mummy movie where every time the mummy like sucks a piece of someone, he gets like a mouth, and then like the next time you see him, he's got like
Sure.
arms. So that's
Yeah.
what I thought it was like, where I was like, oh, this demon's becoming more like a human every time someone dies.
Yeah, because
It's
you also have like that's the like the final form is like another like Sam Neill. And I
yeah.
think like it also like comes as like almost like a commentary on like a woman just wanting to be like seen and loved by like a partner who's like actually present. Not just like a concept of someone that like, oh yeah, I married my husband in the war because he's a spy, but like actually like being physically here and physically present.
Or she could be embracing her insanity.
I mean, or that too. That's fine.
Because I mean, they do show that later. And it's like, wow, this is weird.
Also, too, like one of the most like uncomfortable, like unnecessarily like sexual scenes in this movie was the ballerina scene where like she's like trying to get the ballerina to like hold this like specific angle, but the way that she keeps like looking at the camera because it's established that like Heinrich is filming was just uncomfortable to me. Like I don't know if you guys like felt that way, but like it felt just like aggressively sexual for no reason.
No, it did, and I also didn't know the ages of the girls, so it was extra uncomfortable. Like I didn't like, yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I meant. Where like this is. I'm so glad I watched this, but I'm not gonna go around telling everyone. I'm not gonna call, just like my buddies from back home and be like, "Go watch Possession." It's gonna be a certain person who understands what they're going for. Like you have to understand what the film's going for
I
to be
don't
able to
Like
think
take these
I
harsh.
don't think anybody understood what they were going in for, even the three of us. And I knew about the movie.
and like
So
why was Mark watching this like to begin with? Like this was a home movie that like Mark was like rocking back in his rocking chair, just like casually like watching this. Like, how do you stumble upon a movie that is like a whole movie that is like this oddly like sexually like tensioned and like just like casually watch it? That's like the equivalent of just being like, you know what? I think I'm just gonna watch my wife be with another lover tonight.
I mean,
And then
there's
we're gonna
some
go grab
dudes
tea
that's into
afterwards.
that.
Yeah,
There's
because it's like there's a scene towards the end of the movie where like when she's like having sex with the creature and like he's watching it and she's like holding eye contact with him. Does that
Oh,
mean that like she made him like a cuckold at the end?
I mean, technically, yeah. I mean,
I did.
technically Heinrich did, because that is a term like outside of like the porn community. That is just like a old timey term if someone's like sleeps with your wife. So technically
Yeah.
Heinrich did it to him early on.
I mean, one of the descriptions I read, that's how Sam-Neill was described.
Yeah.
And again, like I feel like that's gotta like you talk about like I mean this whole film is like an exercise in like how far you can truly push your like mental health. Uh
Well, I
but like
think even by today's standards, I feel like this movie could be shot exactly like it is and still be considered pushing the envelope.
Oh,
oh
most definitely.
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, just updated with new actors, use the same script, same shots, everything, and it would still be considered kind of out there and pushing what you should do on film.
Yeah, and it does. And I think like also like the reason that I bring that up is because like not like you have characters that are just like there's no likable characters in here whatsoever. Like nearly every character in here is a piece of dog doo doo.
Yeah. I mean, like the
Um,
teacher's kind of the closest, but even she's a
yeah,
little weird.
yeah. Like, and there's a point too where like Anna has a monologue where she's like talking about like how she likes to make Mark suffer. Like she brings joy in it. Like she likes to use Heinrich as a way to like hurt Mark. And you see that like very early on in the film where like Mark finds out about the infidelity and then she's like was he asking questions like, well, is he better than me? Like is he like more satisfying me? And like literally like she just puts him down at every opportunity she does.
Yeah.
She can.
Yeah, it's but then she comes back. There was a couple other scenes where she comes back and talks about the exact opposite. Close to the beginning of the movie, but still.
And yeah, I think that kind of comes to the fact where the Isabel Janney like does a great job in this movie and like playing that duality because you can definitely tell that this is a woman that is like split in two. And Mark even comments on it at one point. He says, you know, when you're here, when you're home, you wished you were there, referring to Heinrich's place. And then when you're at Heimlich's place, you're hoping to be home. It's like you're never 100% satisfied with this dual life that you have birthed. But in the end, you kind of find that like she is not only like satisfied, but she feel like she feels like she's a character that like it's torn between the thing that she believes is like necessary to do and the things that like she actually wants to do.
And Heinrich at a certain point comes across like he's in the same boat as Mark later on in the movie because she keeps disappearing.
Yeah.
And Heinrich thinks she's back with Mark, and Mark thinks she's with Heinrich, and they're both like, where in the hell did she go?
Yeah.
So
And
Heinrich's almost in the same boat Mark is at a certain point in the movie.
yeah, and like to what you're saying, Josh, I completely agree with everything about her character, and it's why I think this movie bears multiple viewings because like I don't even really know exactly what the movie's trying to say about that, but they are presenting it that whole duality of like not being happy fully in one world over the other, and yeah, like and then to what Mark's saying, where she's she's messing with Mark by being with Heinrich, and then she's messing with him back and forth, but really it's in service of this demon. So like I don't really know what like I don't know if this movie's just presenting a bunch of themes and we're just supposed to take what we feel from it, or if it has kind of like a grand mission statement that I just missed out on this one single viewing.
Well,
But it's a lot
I'm
to think
almost
about.
I'm almost wondering if it's one of those movies that was intended to be one that everybody kind of takes away a different meaning from the
Yeah.
movie or a different theme.
I I want to go like to like something and bounce off of something that Andy was just saying, where it's I feel like this is a I feel like this is a film, and that's obviously, of course, still ahead of its time, even by 2023 standards. But I think it's ahead of its time is because like when this movie came out, I feel like the way that like relationships were like portrayed is like they were always healthy, and this one definitely like has a commentary on the the true struggle that like marriage presents, because like from someone that has been married 9 years next month, and Mark, I know you've also been married, quite a while as well, and
Yeah,
Andy
we'll be 10 years in May, I think.
and Andy, you're like on the cusp of being married, but you've been with Matcha for it's
Yeah,
like 6 or 7 years at this point.
about
Yeah.
8 years. That's crazy.
And like, but so like we all understand that like relationships like take work, and like you have to be present, and it's about like communication. And I definitely think that when you meet Anna and Mark early on in the film, even before seeing this, like finding out everything that you find out later in the movie, is you can definitely tell that like there is lack of communication that is clearly being distributed here in the marriage. And you have a wife that is just kind of fed up with not having a husband that is not only physically present, but also mentally present. And a part of being married to a spy, I also have to take into account that like you're sworn to secrecy. So like you also can't talk about the things that you see and experience when you're out there because of your line of work. And so that is also has to have some sense of bearings on what you do as well. I can't imagine being in a line of work where I couldn't talk to my wife or hear about how my wife's day is, or how everything is going. Like this, that also I feel like has its own bearings on marriage.
Yeah, it's actually an interesting point because I mean, obviously, I don't travel like a spy, but I work freelance in film, so there are times where I'm on the road for like a month or so, uh, and that's already hard enough. But then I couldn't imagine being away and then coming home and I can't talk about like at least I come home with a bunch of stories, and then me and Masha have a great couple of days where I'm sharing all these things that happened to me. So it's got to be straining where it's like not only can we not speak when we come back, I can't even like relate to you anything that's been happening in my life. That's pretty wild.
And at the same time, I think it falls into that category like a lot of military families that they know that some of these things may happen. I mean, even from the aspect of he works for the government, he may be gone for a while, but I don't think you fully comprehend what's going to be coming until it actually happens. And
Yeah.
some people can handle it and some can't. And she couldn't handle it in this movie, but he
I
was willing to give it up at the same time.
Yeah, I think by that point, like he had kind of already seen like the damage that like perhaps this career had taken on his family. And I mean, maybe it was just that was the breaking point. Maybe, she had just kind of felt disconnected from him for a long time. But like a portion of like, well, I feel like what has made my marriage so successful is like that question of like, tell me about your day, and like getting to hear about like my wife's day, and being able to also like tell my wife about my day. And like if I need to vent, like I have that opportunity to do that. And when you have a character or an individual that is in a position that Mark finds himself in, you don't necessarily have that. So you essentially are not only bottling that up and hurting your own mental health, but you're also hurting the marital health of your marriage because there's lack of communication. And eventually, I feel like that lack of communication, it starts off with the job, but eventually continues and progresses into other aspects of the marriage.
Yeah, communication is one of the biggest things that make it work. If you're not telling people what's going on, they don't know how to be supportive. If you've got a spouse that's working a job that they absolutely hate, and when you ask them, how was your day? And you get, I don't want to talk about it. Don't ask me that question. How are you supposed to help them or support them?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's at like the heart of the beginning of these movies' problems, where I think the very first thing they say to each other, where she's like, I don't think I understand. How long? And she's like, I don't know. She's like, want me to stay? She's like, I don't know. Like it's all at the heart of like, I don't want to talk about it through the lens of a demonic possession.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes this movie work so well is because like what makes it like beckon on like multiple viewings isn't necessarily like the uncomfortable or like unsettling underlining tone that happens in this film and just the absolutely like bonkers stuff. Because like Mark watched this movie first and then texted me about it and he's like, have you watched this yet? And I was like, no. He's like, you're not prepared for it. Whatever you, however like much you think you're prepared for this movie, you're not. And then
Yeah.
like coming on the like the other end of that, like, and just what this marriage speaks of, what this movie speaks on, like marriage and the importance of communication, I think is truly valuable. And it's like multi-layered in that as well. And that was like one of the things that like when my wife and I went through premarital counseling, they were like, what I asked, like, what's the secret to a successful marriage? And they were like, communication, 100%.
Yeah, one of the things with possession is that you can view it exactly like it is, and it's one movie. So you can view it as a demon possession movie. You can view it from the lens of it's a metaphor for a bad marriage and divorce. I mean, there's multiple ways you can take this movie.
And I think that's what like really makes it work. And I like, you know, switching to the like the more Lovecraftian elements of this movie, how do you guys think that the movie like handled the monster like ultimately?
From an effects standpoint, it was fantastic. It was
yeah.
it was as unsettling as I think it was meant to be. Just the level of goop used. I don't know if that's an industry term or official term, but a lot of goop. It was disgusting. And yeah, that one sex scene, I wanted to throw up. There's probably a community out there that likes that. So maybe that's you, gentle listener, but you get some great just real good old fashioned monster building effects reminiscent of like The Thing. And it's not fun to watch, but it's not supposed to be. So yeah, they did their job right.
Yeah, there's a couple weeks ago we talked about The Thing, oddly enough, with
nice.
with genre blast director Nathan D. Ludwig. I looked at your screen for some reason when I said that. And one of the films that they showed a couple of years ago was the short film from Japan, and it was this woman finds this tentacle monster in her
already Japan
in her closet, and basically like creates this like love affair with it. So like when I'm watching that particular scene, like that's all I could think about. I was like get like flashbacks to like being uncomfortable in the theater. I was like, oh no.
Yep.
No. And the fact that like she like looks him in the eye while everything's happening made it that much more uncomfortable.
And just kept staring him down. It's like almost like it's awkward.
I'd be like, I'll wait in the other room if it's almost. If it's only a few minutes, I'll be out there.
It's like, let me know when you're done.
Oh God. Oh.
I'm gonna run down to the pub real quick.
Yeah.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
No, it's not that much. Has never seen obscure movies, but she's currently in LA for work, and I was kind of glad I was home alone watching this. So I was like, I don't need to explain myself in any way, shape, or form.
Walks in on that scene.
Yeah, and it's just like, what? I'm like, it's research. They're like, okay,
Don't worry about it.
Doing research, I promise.
Don't look at my work.
It's one of those movies you almost feel better that you watched it alone. In my
Yeah.
case, I
I watched it with my wife, and
Good on you.
It was fairly uncomfortable a couple times. It was like, oh well, this is awkward.
my wife wasn't paying attention, but she happened to be in the room for it. And
That's even worse. Like, at least if you have
yeah.
some context, if you're just like, what did they say?
One of the things that I think that like this movie it does like too like really well is like, you know, talking about the fact that like, yes, this is a monster, but I also think that it's really interesting the way that this movie kind of talks about like the other side, to where there's like really a lot of like frequent like conversations about like who God is, or like what God is, and kind of like the internal like circumstances that like shapes everyone's opinion on that, to where I love like Sam Neill's lines that he says twice in the movie. He says, for me, God is a disease, because he like kind of like gets to experience like this like just super degree of heartbreak.
Yeah.
And later on in the movie, he also says like, for me, God is like, compares God to like the act of like a dog like sitting under the porch, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah, like waiting to die, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of said it earlier too, where I think a lot of that dog stuff went over my head, but it's super interesting. And she does go to church that one scene and just kind of stares down the crucifix, and I almost like feel like I was like, man, I almost wish this was like also a novel, like first, you know, just because I'd love to read this and have a little more like insight into the inner monologues of these characters. It's not based off a book, is it? I see you doing research.
Josh is like, I'm looking. I must know.
Yeah, I don't even want I don't necessarily want a novelization of it. I just kind of wish it was like, you know, like The Shining. Like, I wish it was based off a book so I could go read the original source and maybe like learn more about what they're thinking. Because there are times where I was like, I know I'm supposed to be disoriented by this movie, but I don't. I'm having a hard time relating with the actions of what they're doing.
Yeah, we started watching it, and one of the first things we said was, how many people know Sam Neill from Jurassic Park?
Yep.
Don't realize how much of like a horror icon he is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've never seen him this young, I will say. I've never seen him as young as 1981.
He was in either The Omen 2 or 3. He was
Interesting. I never saw those. I saw the first one, but
he was in Daybreakers. He was in Event Horizon. He has a fairly extensive horror backlog that he
Yeah, and I mean also like we brought up like In the Mouth of Madness earlier.
Yeah.
Was also in that, and he's like really interesting in terms of like which horror like movies he takes on. I think that this movie is like the perfect like example of just the kind of like really out there prestigious horror that he does and that he tackles, because like In the Mouth of Madness is like, sadly, like it's largely forgotten about, like unless you like actually know it. And this movie, I feel like we've established by this point, this movie is 100% a niche kind of movie. Like I don't know anyone, like if I was to go to like just like a common like person that just like watches movies casually, like have you ever heard of Possession? They would probably say like, there's a Gwyneth Paltrow movie called Possession. There's a Sarah Michelle Gellar movie called Possession. They would probably like refer to one of those, and I would be like,
Yeah.
no,
You gotta say
Sam Neill. They would be
Sam
like,
Neill
no.
Possession.
Yeah,
Uh,
and there's I mean, there's even a Exorcist movie from like 2000 called Possession, and I can't
Oh,
remember
that's
the
funny.
dude's name that's in it, but he played one of the James Bonds for like 2 or 3 movies before Pierce Brosnan. But yeah, it's one for some weird reason, now that I've seen it, it's one I had been trying to track down for a very long time because I had read about it on bad movie lists that you can now watch. So
Yeah.
uh,
it,
I
it's not a fun watch. It is a very uncomfortable watch.
Yeah,
But I
if I'm
can
if I'm gonna give a full confession, I actually watched it in 2 sittings, and it wasn't because I didn't have enough time. I literally, after the first hour, it was so relentless. I was like, I need a palate cleanser, and I like walked away, and I came back around like 2 p.m. Like I started, like at 2 p.m., but a couple
oh
hours later.
I also watched this in two different settings, and I watched it mostly because like my week has just been crazy, and like watched it like last like night as like late as I could, and then like well I was like, all right, I need to like go to bed
Yeah.
and like just like unwind for a few minutes because like I don't want this to be the last thing I watch before going to bed. And woke up this morning and like got coffee, and I
All
was
right,
like, man,
cool. I'm
I was
glad I'm
just
not
yeah, I
the
was
only
enthralled
one.
by this. Yeah,
I was like, I needed to know what happened, but I was just like, there's been because I stopped exactly at 1 hour, and it was like,
same.
I was just like, yo, so much has gotten down. I can't believe I have
Yeah,
another hour of this. It's gonna hurt my soul.
it really is nonstop from beginning to end,
Yeah,
and it
And
just progressively gets worse as it goes on.
I also think that like this movie too, this movie like does like really like wild things with it because like it's honestly like unforgiving, it's unapologetic, like it knows the vision that it wants to be. But I also feel like having seen like really prestigious films and like really just amazing films, like couple episodes ago we covered Tigers Are Not Afraid, which is like a really solid Shutter film from start to finish. And then you get into like a movie like this, and it's just like, what? Like the acting, I don't know if you guys felt this way, but the acting like felt so good in this, but like there are also portions of it where I was like, hey, you could definitely tell that like it feels like overacted, but it
Yeah.
works for what the film is doing.
Yeah, that's
Y-
one of the things Kate said during the talk in the coffee shop where Sam Neill flips out. That was one of the first things she said. She's like, wow, it's overacting at its best.
yeah. That scene's a great example of it. But for me, was with Heinrich, where I can't remember what they're talking about, but it's in the hallway outside of his apartment, and he is just bouncing off the walls, like literally, not the expression. Like he's hitting walls and turning as he's talking. And I was just like, I don't know what this choice is, but it fits the tone of the movie. But I don't know if I would ever, as an actor, would know to make that. Like, I'm just gonna start bouncing off the walls and spinning as I speak.
It was like he
Yeah.
was dancing while he was talking.
Exactly.
Oh,
Yeah,
he 100% was dancing while he was doing it. And I think that like
And he was
Andy,
dancing. He was dancing while he was beating Sam Neill's ass. It was
yeah.
like
yeah,
That is true.
everything he did, like dancing around the bathroom in the bar after he's been stabbed. It's like, dude, do you
yeah.
ever not dance? Did
I
you
think like
miss Soul Train?
I think Heinrich was definitely like the epitome of like the overacting in this movie, but it works and it fits. And
Yeah.
like the fact that like every time you see him on screen, he has like his shirt buttoned down to like his
His
like
waist.
pants line. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
like always like that. And I was just like, all right, like you're like I am guessing like this is to like visually like demonstrate how different Mark's character is as a lover, and also like how vastly different Heimlich's character is. Like, are you trying to like show like a superiority complex here? Are you trying to show a man that is like in the height of his like sexuality? Are you trying to show like that on the other end of this you have like a committed dad and like a husband that like wants to make it work. Like I feel like even the act of like when the two of them share the screen, like how virtually different they dress even speaks volumes about uh this like it does speaks really well to this.
Yeah, Heinrich is just a character in and of himself. You usually have background characters that are downplayed or like co-stars that usually don't live up to the leads. But in
Oh,
this
one.
case,
Yeah.
he's every bit as much as over the top, if not more so, than the leads of the movie. And it's I don't know. It almost seems like one of those movies from an acting standpoint that doesn't come along very often.
Yeah, no, I think that you're like right because like the tone of this movie is like it's so hard to like nail down. Like, yes, it is like a drama through and through, but it also has this like degree of camp. And I think that degree of camp exists not necessarily for the bonkers nature of the film, but just where the genre of horror was in that time to where I feel like I can't like point to like early 80s film and just be like not have some degree of camp there.
Yeah, I agree. It's hard to pinpoint though because it's like a different kind of camp. Because a lot of times when I think of camp, I think of like kind of poking fun at things and being a little bit like
Sure.
sillier, and that's not what this is. But it is a kind of camp. It kind of was a little bit like I got a little bit of like Shelley Duvall's style of acting in The Shining, which is also like very kind of over the top and kind of like kind of more in like the hysterical scenes. Uh,
Yes.
so and I don't know, I don't even know if I would necessarily define that as camp, but it's a style of acting for sure because it's not realism, but it's not like what they're going for. So it's not a criticism. It's more like it's
Yeah.
definitely a choice.
Yeah. Uh it, I know we talked about like the duality of like some of these characters. Like there's a scene in the movie where he like Anna comes back and Mark is like playing with Bob and like she goes in to like start cutting up the meat and he's like trying to have this conversation with her. She's like so focused on everything like
That
cutting the meat to the point
so
where she like actually like cuts her throat
Yeah.
and then he also like cuts his arm in three different places. Like
I kept waiting that entire scene for her to like shove her hand in the meat grinder.
yeah.
I
Well
I
like
kept watching it. It's like I'm waiting on it. It's gonna happen. She's gonna stick her hand in the meat grinder. It just
from
never happened.
someone that has like struggled with like self-worth and like depression that has led into self-mutilation. And I mean, honestly, like the fact that I have tattoos also you could make an argument for like self-mutilation as well. But like, uh, I have been to the point where like the rest of the world around you feels so numb that the reason you seek pain in the first place is to feel an ounce of anything, an
Mm.
ounce of something. And I'm almost curious if like that sequence right there is like supposed to be like an illustration of that, to where like he really has like no reason to come in and do anything that's like of what he's like doing. But I feel like the reason that he pursues and like cuts himself is because like A, he wants to feel close to his wife again, and two, like he just wants to feel like some semblance of feeling within their marriage.
I like that reading because I walked away from that scene kind of just chalking it up to being like that's something I don't think I understand why those things happen. But I could see I could kind of see the connections you made there, and that makes more sense of it in my brain because I was just like at that point once he started cutting himself, it was done in such like a nonchalant nature. I couldn't really myself kind of find like why is he doing
Yeah.
this? But I could see that reading being one of the reasons.
I kind of took her going after her throat as trying to put herself out of the misery of everything going on. And he got a hold of the arm before she could finish.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
I
I'm more so why he then sat at the table and so calmly cut into his own flesh like 3 4 times.
Yeah.
That was the part where I didn't really understand.
And like I think from like again like from someone that has been cheated on, there is like this numbness that comes with that reality, to where like you kind of almost feel like you're like you replay everything in your head. You're like, all right, what could I have done differently to make this go not this way? And on the flip side of that, you're like trying to find some semblance of connection to that former person. So it's almost like the equivalent of like if a dog does something bad, he wants to get in the good graces of his master and like wants to be back on like standing. And that's kind of almost how it feels like to from someone that has been cheated on. Like you want to do anything and everything you can to get back in the good graces of that person who cheated on you, because there's some sense of like connection. Your brain processes that heartbreak in some weird effed up way.
I know you read stories like that and hear about that. I know it wasn't that way for me. So, but nobody reacts to things the same. So
Yeah, and I know like, and I think like that's one of the things that like we talked about this earlier, that you walk away from a movie like Possession and it's everyone has a different reading or a different experience with this film. And I
Yep.
feel like if you've gone through that process of heartache that Mark experiences early on in this movie, where he finds out that this wife, the woman that he has devoted his life to, has cheated, um, like that messes with your mental health. And I feel like if you can connect to Mark in that way, it really changes the entire reading you're going to have of this movie.
Yeah. And just to the credit of the movie, we were saying up top, is everyone will come away with its own meaning from this. And it's, even if you might not like this movie, I think it's important to have movies like this in your diet, because if you're only kind of watching mainstream movies, they tend to be a little like so much more spoon fed in terms of the themes, and it's nice to be challenged. It's like parts of this could feel like homework in certain ways, but it's, you can't only watch one type of movie. So I think this is depending on your own. It's cool to watch a piece of art that you get to relate depending on your own personal experiences and take your own meaning from it, instead of just being like, isn't this thing bad and this thing good? So I got to give it credit for that.
Yeah, I think that's the interpretation of like art and period, is that, one of the things that like we've established on this podcast at this point is that like Mark and I see movies vastly different. Even the way that we prepare for podcasts are vastly different. Mark comes
Yeah.
in here and he's just like, I'm ready to talk about it. And I'm like literally like going through and like combing through, pausing the movie, writing down like quotes of the characters. And I'm like, all right, this is going to be a great conversation. How did this
Yeah.
part of the movie like affect my mental health? And like, I'm analyzing the mess out of this movie. And
and that comes because you're more analytical, where I'm more
sure.
reactionary.
Yeah, and I like, but again, like I'm using that as like a great example of like saying like this is how something like a art like Possession like is to be viewed, is that like everyone's gonna walk away with a different experience and gonna have a different take on this movie.
Yeah, there's too many ways to interpret the movie for people to come up with the same result every time watching it.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna say I was nervous for this podcast, but I did do more mental prep than say Bring It On, Shoot or Die. So it's just fun because we tend to talk a little bit more on the B side of movies when we talk.
Sure.
So just like to be talking about a completely different style of filmmaking. I was just like, oh man, I gotta be ready to talk here. I can't just make fun of the weapons looked like they were made out of cardboard. I gotta dig a little deeper than that.
The worst thing you can really talk about this movie is the overacting. That's really about the worst of it.
Yeah.
The special effects for the monster were great. The characters were over the top, but
even just the frantic cinematography, the camera felt alive. Sometimes the people talk to the camera, like it was doing a lot of filmmaking, kind of like experimental type things you don't normally see.
Very much so. This film, like I mentioned earlier how like David Lynch is like my favorite filmmaker of all time, and like this movie feels like surreal on the level of something like Inland Empire, where you just walk away from that movie and you're like, I need a palate cleanser. I need something that's going to make me feel like I'm floating on air right now because like that was way too heavy for me.
I watched an episode of Impractical Jokers because I needed to literally go to the other end of the world from content wise and just watch like literally just the simplest thing I could think of that was gonna make me smile.
I think I turned around and watched Nuke's top 5 ghost videos on YouTube.
Nice.
Nice.
He really does have a good channel. It's great.
I I feel like there's so much more to say about this movie, and this could honestly end up being like a 3-hour podcast.
I think if
But-
we literally waited a year and watched it like like once or twice more in that year and came back, we'd have a whole different discussion. Like if we,
Yeah. He's like,
Well-
it's going on the calendar.
yeah.
It's
That's
already
a-
here
yeah.
because
The possession.
I just
revisit.
bought it.
Nice.
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
but yeah, so I really loved this movie. Anyways, I think that's gonna do it for us on this episode of Abyss Gazing. If you guys have watched Possession, what did you guys think about it? I know that since it's now been on Shudder, a lot of my friends are watching this movie for the first time and just being like,
Psycho Cinema's doing a viewing.
"What?" Yes, they are.
I'm
But-
really looking forward to seeing their reaction to it.
I would love to see this on a big screen, man. I feel like that was kind of like I brought up Inland Empire earlier, which is probably one of the most surreal movies I've ever seen, and I saw that in a theater setting, and like it was like very immersive, kind of like just
Yeah,
wild.
any of these cult movies, if you're there with the right crowd, it's there's no other experience like than watching it that way. No matter what,
Yeah.
like because cult movies, that's what it is. It's a small, devoted group. So when you get to hang out with that crew, it's like it's like nothing but love for the movie.
Which do we? All right. So before we end this, did we want to talk about the other character in this movie of Margaret? Because I noticed we haven't.
I thought
talked
about
about
talking
her.
about her, but I couldn't really think of much to say. Like,
She was annoying.
She was annoying, but like I also like didn't understand like there's that scene where like Mark is tucking her into bed, and like that scene just felt like weirdly like again just weirdly sexual to me. I was like,
yeah, I don't know.
Well, there
like
were
you
a
seem
lot of
confused right now.
there
I-
were
I-
a lot of scenes in the movie that felt awkwardly sexual that weren't or shouldn't have been.
Yeah, there's a lot of like face touching. Like even when the private investigator's like lover, when he's asking Mark about it, he's like holding his hands real tight, and he's like, "I need to
Yeah.
find him." Like it's all filmed that way. But yeah, Margaret, maybe she does have a deeper meaning, but on the surface level, it seemed like she was kind of there just to like be like, "Where's Bob? Ah, he's with Margaret." Like it's always like it's like a very convenient way to just be
Yeah,
like, "Oh shit,
she's
both parents are
A
here."
plot
which-
device.
At the same time, Mark would talk to her. Where's what's her name? Oh, I'm not telling you. Come on, tell me. Okay, she's over here.
Yeah.
He was like,
And maybe it squeezed in an extra kill. So it's
Yeah.
like but I could be wrong. Maybe this movie doesn't seem like a movie that would. It's not a slasher. It wouldn't just add a character just to kill him the way you do in like
No,
Freddy
like,
5. But
I feel like she kind of was added into the character, not only necessarily as a plot device, which she clearly is, but also like to kind of demonstrate that like Mark is a responsible parent. And like even though like he's facing like all of these things, like with Anna and with Heinrich, that like at the end of the day, like the film is still being like, oh hey, Bob is a child and
yeah,
Mark is a responsible parent and is like has the best well wishes in mind for him. And I feel like sometimes like kids are used as like plot devices and they're just kind of like thrown away. So I feel like Margaret was kind of like brought into the film to kind of demonstrate that like Mark and Anna both like despite their problems like both genuinely care about this kid, and Margaret is going to be the babysitter so that he always has someone
Yeah.
there to be there.
Yeah.
hmm
All right, now I think that's gonna do it for us on this
Fantastic.
episode of Abyss Gazing. Maybe we come back in a year and we revisit this.
Every Valentine's Day, we have a possession date.
Maybe next year we make you guys pay for it. We put it behind the Patreon. Who knows? Lots can change in a year, but Andy is Mark did not say this, but Andy is the co-host of the Love What I Love podcast and has been on the show several times and has been on Victims and Villains a few times as well. But where can people find Love What I Love?
You all can find Love What I Love and all the fantastic places podcasts are available. Spotify, I don't even know where people find podcasts anymore. Apple. You can also find us on social media at LWIL Podcast. That's Instagram, Facebook. We have a lot of fun stuff going on. And yes, stay tuned. Our next episode will be a doozy on Saturday Night Fever, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. So we have an over 2-hour episode coming your way.
Jeez. All right. Well, once you guys get done with this episode, go check out that episode. And Mark, where can people follow your mini adventures?
Yeah, I still paint miniatures, and I've actually been updating recently. I actually posted something new the other day, which is kind of funny because I went like 6 months without posting anything. But yeah, I paint my miniatures and adventures into 3D printing on titanium juggernaut painting on Instagram.
All right. Well, you guys can find me. I'm on Letterboxd at Captain Nostalgia, and I'm also making tie-in content for our upcoming film festival, Horrific Hope, to be celebrating its second year, April 14th and 15th at the Alamo Draft House over on TikTok. And that is Gent Ghostface, Gent. And you guys can find our parent company, Victims and Villains. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, and of course, wherever you guys get your podcast. And when you guys are there, also be sure to not only follow Love What I Love, but follow us as well because we are on our own feed now. And happy belated Valentine's Day. Remember, the longer you gaze into the abyss, the more the abyss gazes